The U.S. has long led the world in the number of children sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
America is the only country in the world that allows life sentences without the possibility of parole for people under 18. And black children are the ones being disproportionately sentenced.
This year, I spent 2.5 years of those 39 years on death row, along with two of my best friends for crimes we did not commit.
Most people find it hard being locked indoors for a few weeks.
Today, the Phoenix woman who's become the nation's longest-serving female inmate, tasting freedom for the first time in nearly 5 decades.
Imagine what decades of incarceration can do to you. There are cases where people who were practically kids got released as elders into a world that was vastly different from the one they left when they were imprisoned. Let's take a look at some people who have outlived the most insane prison sentences ever given. Number 1. Thomas Trantino. Thomas Trantino, who confessed to being a troubled and dangerous individual, was born in 1938. He began abusing substances at the young age of 14 and had been imprisoned for 6 years by the time he was 20. One fateful night in August 1963, while under the influence, he was involved in a confrontation that resulted in the deaths of 2 police officers by his hand. After evading capture for 66 hours, Trantino surrendered but denied committing the offenses he was charged with. Despite his claims, the evidence overwhelmingly indicated his guilt, and he was swiftly convicted. Moreover, the jury sentenced him to death. However, he remained on death row only until 1971, when New Jersey repealed the death penalty, and his sentence was changed to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. His time on death row transformed him into a writer and artist, leading him to author and illustrate 2 books while incarcerated. Remarkably, in 2002, after spending over 38 years in prison, Trantino was paroled, becoming the longest-held inmate in New Jersey's history. Number 2. Ricky Jackson. Imagine being wrongfully imprisoned for nearly 4 decades for a crime you didn't commit. That was the grim reality for Ricky Jackson starting in 1975. At the age of 19, Jackson, along with his friends Wiley and Ronnie Bridgman, was wrongfully convicted of murdering salesman Harry Franks. Their conviction rested solely on the testimony of a 13-year-old boy named Eddie Vernon, who claimed to have witnessed the crime. Other than his statement, there was no physical evidence linking Jackson and the Bridgman brothers to the scene. Initially sentenced to death, Jackson avoided execution due to multiple appeals and clerical errors. Thankfully, in 2013, the key witness recanted his testimony in court, admitting he had been coerced by police into lying. It was revealed that Vernon hadn't seen the attack at all. He was actually on a school bus a mile away at the time. This revelation led to the exoneration of Jackson and Wiley Bridgman in 2014. Both had spent 39 years awaiting justice, while Ronnie Bridgman had been released earlier in 2003. The trio is set to receive $18 million in compensation for their wrongful incarceration. Number 3. Otis Johnson. The phrase, "wrong place, wrong time," resonates deeply with Otis Johnson, a former inmate. In 1975, Johnson was apprehended for a crime he insists he did not commit. On May 5th, while walking in Harlem, New York, he was stopped and searched by police officers. They claimed he matched the description of a suspect involved in a recent shooting of a police officer nearby, noting only that the suspect was wearing a tan jacket. This was deemed sufficient for the officers to suspect Johnson. Despite the absence of solid evidence or trustworthy witnesses, Johnson was convicted and received a sentence of 25 years to life. During his long imprisonment, Johnson leaned on his prior experience as a monk in Hong Kong, initiating several programs at New York's Greenhaven Prison to teach meditation to fellow inmates and even performing secretarial duties. His exemplary conduct made him eligible for parole 9 times. At several hearings, he was advised that confessing could secure his release, yet he steadfastly refused to admit to a crime he did not commit. Ultimately, his integrity paid off at his 9th parole hearing in 2014 when he was finally released. Number 4. Joe Ligon. For decades, the United States has been the global leader in sentencing minors to life imprisonment without parole, with Pennsylvania incarcerating more young individuals for life than any other state. Joe Ligon holds the record for being the oldest juvenile lifer in the nation, having served the longest sentence, a notably tragic record. Released in 2021 at the age of 83, Ligon had been incarcerated since he was 15 years old. The son of Alabama sharecroppers, Joe Ligon was first imprisoned during the presidency of Dwight D. Eisenhower, around the time Nat King Cole's Pretend topped the Billboard 100 charts. The world has dramatically transformed since then, becoming almost unrecognizable to him. In 1953, Ligon and 4 other black teenagers were implicated in multiple robberies and stabbings in Philadelphia that resulted in 2 deaths. While he confesses to stabbing someone that night, Ligon maintains he did not commit murder. Over the decades, he asserts he has changed. Now thinking about his future, Ligon is considering employment in janitorial work at the law offices of the attorneys who secured his release, using the cleaning skills he acquired while in prison. Adjusting to life outside the prison walls after more than 6 decades behind bars presents significant challenges. Ligon must navigate a world that has advanced technologically and socially far beyond his experiences. The emotional and psychological impacts of such prolonged incarceration are profound, and his ability to reintegrate into society remains uncertain. However, he expresses a cautious optimism, hopeful that the lessons learned and the personal growth achieved during his imprisonment will help him build a meaningful life in his remaining years. Number 5. Betty Smithy. Betty Smithy. On New Year's Day in 1963, Nanny Betty Smithy was responsible for the death of a child and subsequently received a life sentence without parole. She entered prison as a young woman and was released in 2012, by then an elderly lady requiring a cane to walk. Her pleas for clemency had been rejected by 2 previous governors, making her the longest incarcerated woman in the U.S. at the time. Finally, Governor John Brewer granted her clemency with the support of Arizona's parole board, who recognized that she was no longer the same person who had committed the crime against baby Sandra Gerberick in 1963. Known as an old code lifer, Smithy was sentenced before 1973, necessitating a governor's commutation for release. Since 1989, only 3 lifers in similar circumstances have received clemency. This decision came nearly 5 decades after her conviction for the murder of Sandy Gerberick, one of the 4 children she cared for as a 20-year-old live-in babysitter. Number 6. Sheldry Topp. Sheldry Topp was just 17 when he was convicted of murder and sentenced to life without parole in a Michigan county court. At that time, John F. Kennedy was the President of the United States. Topp was released from prison in 2019 after serving over 56 years. To mark his release, he celebrated with a steak dinner alongside his brother. Topp was known as the oldest juvenile lifer in Michigan. He never sought to overturn his conviction, and his requests for a reduced sentence in 1987 and 2008 were denied. Topp was apprehended in Chicago in 1962, shortly after he had broken into Charles Davis's home and fatally stabbed him. Davis was 50 years old. Records indicate that Topp had frequented mental hospitals since the age of 12. He escaped from a mental hospital in Pontiac, Michigan on the day of the murder. Topp had recently undergone treatments like electroshock therapy and hydrotherapy, which may have influenced his mental state on that tragic day, leading to severe consequences for him and his victims. These stories of Howard Christensen, Richard Honeck, and Sheldry Topp serve as stark reminders of the profound impact of long-term incarceration on individuals' lives. Each man, imprisoned at a young age, spent the majority of their lives confined with fleeting moments of freedom. Their tales echo the complexities of justice and rehabilitation, illustrating the enduring consequences of their actions and the societal responses to their crimes. Number 7. Soren Mathiasen. In 1876, this hefty man sought the assistance of horse dealer Niels Bogelund, not only to borrow money, but also to find a wealthy wife. However, the wife Soren married wasn't wealthy, and when Bogelund came to collect his debt, Soren was unable to pay. Overwhelmed by significant debts and lacking any means to settle them, Soren saw no other option but to kill Bogelund, a decision that proved to be his gravest error. He was quickly apprehended after the murder and subsequently sentenced to over 49 years of hard labor at Horsens State Prison. The demanding labor took a visible toll on him, yet surprisingly, he remained quite stout. This cunning Dane was finally granted parole in 1925. Number 8. John Sonny Franzese. In 1950, John Franzese joined the ranks of the Colombo crime family in New York City, quickly establishing himself as one of the most formidable enforcers in the mafia. Despite his claims of being responsible for nearly 50 deaths, his only conviction came in 1967 when he was found guilty of orchestrating a string of bank robberies nationwide. It seems the police settled for what they could prove at that time. He received a 50-year sentence, but was paroled in 1978. However, he repeatedly found himself back in prison for violating parole at least 6 times. At the age of 93 in 2011, Franzese was sentenced again, this time to 8 years for extortion and loan sharking. He celebrated his 100th birthday in 2017, coinciding with the completion of his 8-year term, and was subsequently released from prison. Over his lifetime, Franzese spent more than 40 years incarcerated, effectively splitting his adult life between criminal activities and time in prison. Franzese's resilience and ability to navigate the treacherous waters of organized crime earned him a notorious reputation, making him a legend in mafia circles. Despite his advancing age, he remained involved in criminal activities, demonstrating a relentless commitment to his life of crime. His long-term incarceration did little to deter his involvement in illegal enterprises, as he continued to wield influence and maintain connections within the criminal underworld. Even in his later years, Franzese's story captivated the public, reflecting the enduring fascination with the mafia's shadowy figures and their turbulent lives. His release at 100 years old marked the end of an era, closing a chapter on one of the most enduring and enigmatic figures in organized crime history. Number 9. Howard Christensen. At just 16 years old, he became embroiled in a criminal spree that culminated in the death of schoolteacher Ada Carey. The shocking crime sent ripples through the community, leading to his conviction and a life sentence. The public's outcry was palpable, with a petition amassing 3,000 signatures demanding that Christensen never be granted a pardon. His prolonged incarceration profoundly affected his mental health, resulting in him spending about 30 years intermittently in the Yankton State Mental Institution. The 1970s brought a glimmer of hope as his sentence was adjusted to allow for the possibility of parole. However, his declining health and old age saw him move to a nursing home in 1995. Howard Christensen passed away in 1999 at the age of 79, having spent over 58 years in institutionalization, with only a brief period of freedom towards the end of his life. To put it into perspective, his years of incarceration nearly tripled the years he lived as a free man. Number 10. Charles Edrit Ford. In 1952, Charles Edrit Ford was put on trial under highly prejudicial conditions. He was accused of murder and faced an all-white jury in Maryland, a full 12 years before the end of racial segregation in the U.S. During the trial, his alibi witnesses, who could confirm he was not at the crime scene, were not called to testify. Additionally, the witnesses against him gave conflicting testimonies, yet the attorney assigned to Ford was not a trial lawyer, leaving him poorly defended. As a result, Ford received a life sentence. He maintained his innocence throughout, but it wasn't until 2015, after over 64 years in prison, that his case was thoroughly reviewed. The re-examination of the evidence led to his sentence being vacated, overturning the original verdict as a miscarriage of justice. However, his innocence was not conclusively proven, so instead of being completely freed, he He was moved to a health center in Baltimore in 2016 at the age of 86. After 64 years, this partial freedom was a significant, albeit incomplete, relief. Despite the limited nature of his freedom, Ford reportedly cried tears of joy upon hearing his case had finally been reconsidered more fairly. Number 11. Richard Honeck. In 1976, during America's bicentennial celebrations, Richard Honeck passed away at 97 years old. Previously, he had completed what was then the longest prison term ending in release, having been incarcerated since 1899 for the murder of Walter Köhler. Originally, his crime was so historic that newspapers used a drawing instead of a photograph. Honeck spent his first 12 years at Joliet Correctional Center in Illinois. His sentence escalated after he assaulted a deputy warden with a makeshift shiv, leading to 20 days in solitary confinement before his transfer to Menard Penitentiary. There, he spent the last 35 years of his sentence working in the prison bakery, exchanging his shiv for baking gloves. Released in 1963, he had been imprisoned for a total of 64 years. Despite his efforts in prison baking, the first proper cake he likely received came after decades. His transformation over the years was stark, as seen in his early and late mugshots, highlighting the deep impact of his lengthy incarceration. Number 12. Paul Geidel, Jr. When Richard Honeck was released in 1963, Paul Geidel, Jr. was still serving a life sentence for violent crimes committed over 50 years earlier. Geidel eventually broke Honeck's record by remaining incarcerated for 68 years and 8 months. At 17, Geidel tried to rob an elderly man, but ended up accidentally killing him with a chloroform-soaked rag. Despite becoming eligible for parole in 1931, Geidel continued to serve time through several decades, finally being offered release in 1974. However, he declined, having become accustomed to life behind bars. By 1980, at the age of 86, Geidel accepted parole. Having spent nearly 7 decades in prison, he spent his remaining days in a nursing home, a testament to the lengthy repercussions of a youthful mistake. Number 13. Warren John Nutter. Warren John Nutter passed away just before Christmas in 2021 at the Iowa State Penitentiary. He was 84 years old and had spent the majority of his life behind bars. Nutter was imprisoned for 65 years for killing a police officer in Independence, Ohio in 1956. He held the record for the longest time spent in jail in Iowa and was one of the longest-serving prisoners in the entire country. His legal troubles began at the young age of 14. In January 1956, he and some friends left their homes in Illinois for California. Along the way, they stole a car and robbed a store, but were caught in Buchanan County. During their escape attempt, one of them shot and killed a police officer. Nutter was sentenced to death, but the governor commuted it to life in prison in 1957. His case contributed to Iowa abolishing the death penalty in 1965. By the time he died, he no longer posed a threat to society and was simply an old man in a new prison, resigned after spending so many years incarcerated. Number 14. Renee Lima Marin. At just 19, Renee Lima Marin was on a risky path. In 1998, he and his friend Michael Clifton committed armed robberies at 2 video stores, hoping for quick money. They were soon caught after police received their descriptions and the getaway car's license plate number. Lima received an astonishing 98-year prison sentence, despite no injuries occurring during the crimes. The prosecutor had broken down the robberies into multiple charges, including kidnapping, as the robbers had forced employees to move between rooms. This approach could have led to a 300-year sentence, so in a way, Lima and Clifton were fortunate. Despite this, Lima faced life imprisonment until 2008, when a clerical error led to his early release on parole. The error indicated his sentences were concurrent rather than consecutive, allowing his release 90 years early. Determined to reform, Lima worked hard, started a family, and became a model citizen. In 2014, however, the mistake was discovered, and Lima was rearrested. Thankfully, the judge overseeing his case found the reincarceration unjust, overturned the ruling, and released Renee for good in 2017. Demonstrating his growth, he even sought out and apologized in person to one of the store clerks from that night 20 years ago. Number 15. Chimoy Thipiaso. Can you imagine the length of the longest prison sentence ever given? 200 years? 1,000 years? 2,000 years? How about 141,078 years? It sounds unbelievable, but that was the sentence Chimoy received in 1989. Chimoy was no ordinary woman. She was married to a high-ranking member of the Royal Thai Air Force and worked for the Petroleum Authority of Thailand. With such severe punishment, one would assume she committed some of the most horrendous crimes imaginable. Perhaps she destroyed a building full of orphans, caused the extinction of the dinosaurs, or even killed Harambe. Surprisingly, none of these fictional scenarios were true. Her actual crime was fraud. Chimoy was at the helm of a pyramid scheme that defrauded over 16,000 people, amassing more than $204 million. This colossal scam posed a significant threat to the stability of the Thai banking system, leading to widespread financial panic and a loss of public trust. The authorities, aiming to set a powerful example, handed her an astronomical sentence that, while shocking, was meant to underscore the gravity of her crimes. However, the sensational sentence of 141,078 years was more symbolic than practical. Thai laws at the time capped prison terms for fraud at a maximum of 20 years, rendering her original sentence legally untenable. After a legal review, Chimoy's sentence was adjusted to comply with the law, resulting in her release after serving only 8 years in prison. During her incarceration, Chimoy maintained a low profile, avoiding significant activities that would attract attention. Her early release was seen by many as a stroke of incredible luck, while others viewed it as a shortcoming of the justice system to fully address the extensive damage she caused. The resolution of Chimoy Thipiaso's case underscores the challenges and complexities involved in prosecuting large-scale financial fraud, highlighting the need for robust legal frameworks to effectively prevent and address such crimes. It also serves as a stark reminder of the importance of adhering to legal standards to ensure justice is delivered in a fair and consistent manner. Thanks for watching this video. Let us know which prison sentence intrigued you the most. And oh, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any of our videos.